Ed, and welcome to this week's edition of 1 Minute Answers from 1 Minute Economics, the show in which I answer your economics-related questions in a minute or so each. Today, I'm going to be presenting the show with my co-host, Mr. Pooh, who has been bored out of his mind today, so we're going to be spending some quality time doing this stuff. And as usual, we have a topic for this week, which is debt, and you guys have asked me for, I would say, really good questions. But before answering them, I will be picking the topic for next week, which is going to be healthcare. Now, my choice is probably pretty obvious in light of the fact that there have been lots of discussions surrounding American healthcare lately, given Trump's intention of replacing Obama's Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. So if you have a question about the healthcare system of the United States, about the healthcare system of another country, or if you want to ask me anything at all related to, let's say, the economic dimension of healthcare, like, for example, dealing with illnesses, being prepared financially for them, and so on, then simply ask me a question by posting a comment below, and I'm going to do my best to answer it next week. The first question for today has been asked by Exorcy, who would like to know what would happen if the debt of a nation would remain unpaid for a long period of time. And I think my answer will seem confusing at first, but please bear with me. You see, the thing is, countries are pretty good at paying their creditors on time because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. And if they don't, they enter what's called a default, and the economic and also political consequences can be dramatic, so countries do their best to avoid this. Now, the thing is, again, it sounds strange. They pay their debt quickly, but they don't actually pay their debt. As in, they pay the current creditors by taking out new loans. And by rolling over debt, the obvious thing that happens is that the debt to GDP ratio of a country goes up and up and up and up again. And therefore, nowadays, we talk about debt to GDP ratios like the 100% one you've referred to in your example as, being just business as usual. It doesn't shock us anymore. It doesn't surprise us anymore. And, we even have countries like Japan with debt to GDP ratios of 250%. So that's pretty much how things work. Again, the debt of a nation is usually paid on time, but it's done so by taking on new debt in the overwhelming majority of cases. And in my opinion, the evolution of debt to GDP ratios all over the world is nothing short of, I'm going to say, terrifying. For today's second question, Cameron would like to know if it's a good idea to pay your student loans right away or just keep making the minimum monthly payments with, the idea of using that money to, for example, have some bank deposits for emergency situations and stuff like that. And my answer to that question can be summarized in just two words, and those two words are opportunity cost. The bottom line is that ultimately it all depends on whether or not the person who's making that decision is genuinely capable of putting the extra money to good use. So if John comes to me and says, yeah, I could pay my student loans right away, but I'm thinking about just making the minimum payments so that I can, for example, use the extra money to start a business, or maybe set a little something aside each month for emergencies and stuff like that. So if I see someone who genuinely has a sound plan and he asks me this question, then I'm going to say, go for it, just make the minimum payments. You seem to have things under control, good luck. However, if Mark comes to me and says, I could pay my student loans right away, but I'd much rather just make the minimum payments and use the extra amounts to buy gadgets and the home cinema or whatever. So in such situations, when I see that the person in question would probably just use the extra money to upgrade from, the iPhone X-1 to the brand new iPhone X, then I'm probably going to tell him, the best approach is probably just getting your student loans paid. So again, it all depends on your ability to meaningfully put that extra money to good use. For today's third question, Sorin thought it would be a good idea to share data about the debt levels of various countries, and he asked what the most indebted nation in the world is and also what the least indebted one is. And I'm going to start by sharing a table with, plain and simple, the nominal debt levels. In other words, you can see the top 15 countries based on just how much money they currently owe, and as you can see, the United States is the leader by far. However, the United States also has a huge economy, it has a huge population, and therefore it might not be the best idea to just look at the debt level, but rather to analyze the debt level and compare it to the size of the economy. And to do that, I'm going to share another table which illustrates the top 15 countries in terms of debt to GDP. And as you can notice, the United States, which is the leader in the previous table, is now not even in the top 10. And as you can also see, the leader by far is Japan with 250%. So to answer your question, I would say that the best approach is just going by debt to GDP, and the most indebted country in the world when it comes to debt to GDP is definitely Japan. Now, to answer the final part of your question, I'm going to share a table with the top 15 least indebted nations of the world from a debt to GDP perspective, and it is interesting to see quite a few oil producing nations on that list. You have Saudi Arabia and so on. It's definitely an interesting experiment, and I agree with you. I'm happy that I've shared this data because it does tell us a thing or two about just how indebted countries are at this point. The fourth and final question for today has been asked by In the Frame, who would like to know what I think about India's debt management. She has voiced concerns about the fact that, in her opinion, policy is focusing too much on uplifting the poor and not enough on growth. Now, I'm going to start by sharing the table related to the nominal debt levels, and as you can see, India is on position number 8, so they do owe a lot of money. However, again, India is a huge country, and if we look at things from a debt to GDP perspective, then we realize that India's debt to GDP level of only 69.5% is not huge compared to what other countries have. So for this reason, I'd say that when it comes to debt to GDP, the situation doesn't seem horrible in India. But do keep in mind, for example, that back when Argentina defaulted, they didn't have a huge debt to GDP ratio. So don't make the mistake of assuming that as long as your house is in order when it comes to debt, everything's going to be fine. No. If the market decides to no longer lend you money, you're going to be in trouble. And it may just happen that for whatever reason, the market would, for example, keep lending money to Japan despite its 250% debt to GDP level and refuse to lend money to India. So it's important to keep in mind that there are a lot of variables at play, but fundamentally speaking, the market ultimately decides whether or not it continues lending to one country or another. That's it for today, guys. Goodbye, Internet. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and if you can, of course, please be active in the community, like my videos, comment, subscribe to 1 Minute Economics if you haven't by now, and visit 1minuteeconomics.com to find out how you can support the channel financially as well. Have an awesome weekend, guys.